The desert wind howled through the canyon like a wounded animal as Lydia Reeves clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. The stagecoach that had abandoned her fading into the dusty horizon of 1875 Arizona territory. Her copper hair whipped across her tear-stained face as she stared at the ramshackle town ahead Redemption Springs where she knew no one, and had nothing but the clothes on her back, and her mother's silver locket clasped around her neck. The journey west had drained her last penny, a desperate flight from Pittsburgh after the scandal that had destroyed her family. Now, at 21, she stood alone at a crossroads between her past and an uncertain future. The setting sun painted the desert in hues of amber and crimson as Lydia took her first tentative steps toward the town, her boots kicking up dust that mingled with her silent tears. Redemption Springs appeared before her like a mirage, a collection of wooden buildings flanking a single wide dirt street. Oil lamps flickered to life in windows as evening descended, and the sounds of a piano drifted from the saloon. The town seemed both a haven and a threat to a woman alone. Lydia passed the general store, closed for the evening, and the blacksmith shop, silent without its usual din of metal striking metal. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her she hadn't eaten since dawn. The few people on the street, mostly men, cast curious glances her way, and she quickened her pace, keeping her eyes downcast. A gruff voice called out from behind her. "Miss, you lost." She turned to see a broad-shouldered man approaching, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His spurs jangled with each deliberate step, and the badge on his chest caught the last rays of sunlight. "The town sheriff." I've just arrived," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Town ain't kind to those without purpose," he said, his weathered face impassive. "What brings you to Redemption Springs?" Before she could answer, the saloon doors burst open, releasing a flood of raucous laughter and piano music. 3 cowboys stumbled out, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Evening, boys." "Settling down early tonight, I hope?" The tallest of the 3 straightened at the sound of authority and tipped his hat. "Evening, Sheriff. Just heading back to the ranch." His voice was deep but clear, unlike the slurred speech of his companions. The sheriff nodded and turned back to Lydia. "As I was saying, I'm looking for work," she blurted, desperation overriding her natural reserve. "Any work." The tall cowboy had begun to lead his friends away but paused at her words. He turned, and for the first time, Lydia saw his face clearly strong-jawed and sun-bronzed, with eyes the color of a summer storm. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house might need help," he said unexpectedly. "Lost her girl last month to marriage." He studied her for a moment, then added, "Name's Garrett Jones, foreman at the Crescent Moon Ranch." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's right. Martha Peterson's been complaining about doing all that work herself." He pointed down the street. 2-story building with the blue trim. "Tell her Sam sent you." Lydia whispered her thanks, relief washing over her. As she turned to go, the cowboy Garrett spoke again. "Wait." He stepped forward, leaving his companions swaying in the street. He reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand. "For supper." Town can be hard on newcomers. She looked down at the silver coins in her palm, pride warring with hunger. "I can't, it's not charity," he said firmly. "It's a welcome. Redemption Springs doesn't see many new faces." Their eyes met, and Lydia felt something flutter in her chest, the first spark of hope since leaving Pittsburgh. "Thank you, Mr. Jones." He tipped his hat again. "Miss Reeves, Lydia Reeves, Miss Reeves." He nodded, a slight smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Welcome to Redemption Springs." As Lydia walked away toward the boarding house, she could feel his eyes following her, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel quite so alone. Martha Peterson was a stern-faced woman with kind eyes that belied her brusque manner. She looked Lydia up and down critically before nodding once. "Sheriff vouched for you, that's good enough. Room and board in exchange for work cooking, cleaning, laundry. I don't tolerate laziness or loose morals. This is a respectable establishment." Lydia's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson, I'm a hard worker." "We'll see," the older woman replied, but her eyes softened as she noticed Lydia's exhaustion. "You've traveled far from Pittsburgh." Martha raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. "There's stew on the stove, eat then sleep. Work begins at dawn." The small attic room was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed and a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. After eating her first hot meal in days, Lydia collapsed onto the thin mattress, her fingers curling around her mother's locket. "I made it, Mama," she whispered to the empty room. "I made it west." Sleep claimed her quickly, but her dreams were haunted by the scandal that had driven her from home, her mother's illness, the debts, and the terrible choice her mother had made to secure money for medicine, working in a brothel where she'd contracted the fever that ultimately killed her. The whispers had followed Lydia everywhere. Her mother died in shame. No decent family would have her now. She awoke before dawn, tears drying on her cheeks, and prepared to face her first day in Redemption Springs. The weeks that followed established a routine. Lydia rose early, helped prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly traveling salesmen and the occasional family passing through, then spent her days laundering, cleaning, and assisting Martha with whatever needed doing. The work was hard but honest, and slowly Lydia began to feel the weight on her shoulders lighten. She saw Garrett Jones occasionally, riding through town on ranch business or stopping by the general store while she was running errands for Martha. Each time he tipped his hat and offered a gentle smile that made her heart race. One afternoon in late September, as Lydia hung laundry in the yard behind the boarding house, she heard the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats. Turning, she found Garrett dismounting from his chestnut stallion. "Afternoon, Miss Reeves," he called, tethering his horse to the fence post. "Is Mrs. Peterson about?" "She's visiting the doctor for her rheumatism," Lydia replied, suddenly conscious of her work-worn hands and simple dress. He nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "Then perhaps you can help me. We're having a harvest gathering at the ranch next weekend. The boss wants to invite everyone in town, his way of building goodwill before winter sets in. I was hoping Mrs. Peterson might prepare some of her famous apple pies for the occasion." "I'm sure she'd be delighted," Lydia said, carefully pinning a sheet to the line. "She speaks highly of your employer, Mr. McAllister." "He's a fair man," Garrett agreed, then hesitated. "You'll be coming too, won't you?" Lydia's hands stilled on the laundry. "Me." "Everyone's invited," he said, then more softly added, "though I'm particularly hoping you'll attend." Their eyes met, and Lydia felt that same flutter in her chest. I don't know if Mrs. Peterson can spare me." "I'll speak with her," he promised. "We've had a good season, and it's time for celebration before the hard winter months. There'll be dancing." The thought of dancing, something she hadn't done since before her mother's illness, brought unexpected tears to Lydia's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but not before Garrett noticed. "Miss Reeves, have I upset you?" "No," she said hastily. "It's just been a long time since I've attended any social gathering." He stepped closer, his expression gentle. "Then it's high time you did. Redemption Springs isn't Pittsburgh, but we know how to enjoy ourselves." The mention of her hometown startled her. "How did you know where I'm from?" "Small town," he said with a shrug. "Word travels. Though that's all anyone seems to know about you, where you're from, not why you left." His gaze was curious but respectful. "Everyone has a past, Miss Reeves. Out here, it's what you do now that matters." Before Lydia could respond, Martha Peterson's voice called from the back door. "Lydia, who are you talking to?" As Martha approached, leaning heavily on her walking stick, Garrett explained his invitation. To Lydia's surprise, the older woman readily agreed to both the pies and Lydia's attendance. "Girl works too hard," Martha said bluntly. "Could use some merriment." After finalizing arrangements, Garrett mounted his horse but paused before riding away. "Miss Reeves, would you allow me to escort you to the gathering?" Martha answered before Lydia could. Of course she would. Can't have her walking all that way in her good dress. Garrett's smile was radiant as he tipped his hat. "I'll call for you at 4 then." As he rode away, Martha gave Lydia a knowing look. That boy's been finding reasons to pass by for weeks now, about time he spoke up. Mrs. Peterson, Lydia protested, her cheeks burning. I'm old, not blind, the older woman snorted. Now finish those sheets. We've got work to do and apparently pies to bake. That night, as Lydia prepared for bed, she opened her mother's locket, gazing at the tiny portrait inside her mother as she had been before illness ravaged her, beautiful and proud. For the first time since arriving in Redemption Springs, Lydia allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. The day of the gathering arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the occasion. Lydia wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white trim that she'd carefully mended and pressed. Martha had insisted on arranging her copper hair, pinning it up with her own mother's combs. There, the older woman said with satisfaction. Pretty as a picture. When Garrett arrived in a wagon freshly washed for the occasion, his eyes widened at the sight of Lydia. He himself was transformed from the working cowboy she knew, dressed in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best denims, his dark hair slicked back. "Miss Reeves," he said softly, "you look beautiful." The drive to the Crescent Moon Ranch gave them their first real opportunity to talk. Garrett pointed out landmarks along the way, the creek that never ran dry, the grove of cottonwoods where wild horses sometimes gathered, the distant mountains that marked the territory's boundaries. "How long have you been in Arizona?" Lydia asked. 8 years now, he replied. "Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." "You fought in the war." She studied his face, trying to gauge his age. He nodded, his expression momentarily distant. "Enlisted at 17. Too young to understand what I was getting into, old enough to carry a rifle." He shook away the memory. "McAllister gave me a chance when I drifted through, half-starved and haunted. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman." "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Garrett agreed. "Treats his men fair, doesn't ask questions about where you've been, only cares about what you can do." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you all the way from Pittsburgh?" Lydia tensed, her fingers automatically reaching for her locket. "A fresh start," she said simply. Garrett seemed to understand her reluctance. "Well, Redemption Springs got its name for a reason. Lot of folks here looking for second chances." The ranch appeared before them, a sprawling main house surrounded by barns, bunkhouses, and corrals. Lanterns hung from posts and trees, waiting to be lit at dusk, and long tables had been set up in the yard. Ranch hands were already busy with preparations, and several wagons had arrived before them. As Garrett helped Lydia down from the wagon, a tall, gray-haired man approached them, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "This must be the famous Miss Reeves I've been hearing about," he said, extending his hand. "Edward McAllister, welcome to Crescent Moon." "Thank you for having me, Mr. McAllister," Lydia replied, taking his hand. "Any friend of Garrett's is welcome here," the rancher said warmly. "Especially one who helped bring Martha Peterson's apple pies." He glanced at Garrett with a knowing smile. "Why don't you show Miss Reeves around before things get too lively?" As they walked through the ranch, Lydia was struck by the sense of community. Ranch hands greeted Garrett with respect and her with friendly curiosity. Children played near the corrals while their parents set up food and instruments. It was so different from the suspicious whispers that had followed her in Pittsburgh. "Everyone seems so happy here," she observed. "Ranch life is hard," Garrett replied, "but there's satisfaction in it. We work together, depend on each other." He paused, turning to face her. "That's why gatherings like this are important, reminds us we're not alone out here." As the sun began to set, more townspeople arrived. Martha came with Sheriff Sam in his buggy, bringing her promised pies. Lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the yard, and a group of ranch hands took up instruments, fiddles, guitars, a banjo, and a harmonica. The music started, lively and inviting, and soon couples were dancing in the cleared area before the musicians. Lydia watched, smiling at the joy on their faces, until Garrett appeared at her side with 2 plates of food. "Hungry?" he asked, handing her a loaded plate. They ate together on a bench near the edge of the gathering, talking easily about the ranch, the coming winter, and the townsfolk around them. When they finished, Garrett took their plates and set them aside, then extended his hand. "Dance with me." Lydia hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "It's been a while," she warned. His smile was reassuring. "I'm no expert myself, we'll muddle through together." The musicians had shifted to a slower tune, and Garrett guided her into the circle of dancers, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand in his. They moved together awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as they found their rhythm. "See," he said softly. "Not so difficult." As they danced, Lydia felt the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crumble. There was something about Garrett Jones, his steady presence, his quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in years. The evening continued with more dancing, storytelling around the fire that had been built as the night grew cooler, and singing. Lydia found herself laughing, truly laughing, as Sheriff Sam recounted a tale of chasing a chicken thief through the streets of Redemption Springs. It was well past midnight when Garrett finally drove her back to the boarding house. The stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in Pittsburgh. "Thank you," she said as they stood at the boarding house door. "This was the most wonderful evening I've had in, I can't remember when." Garrett took her hand gently. "I'd like to call on you properly, Miss Reeves, with Mrs. Peterson's permission, of course." Lydia's heart raced. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Jones." He smiled, lifting her hand to his lips for a brief, tender kiss. "Until Sunday, then." She watched him drive away, her hand still warm from his touch before slipping inside. Martha was waiting up, pretending to read by lamplight. "Had a good time, did you?" the older woman asked casually. "The best," Lydia admitted, unable to keep the smile from her face. Martha nodded approvingly. "Garrett Jones is a fine man, responsible, respectful." "Yes," Lydia agreed softly. "He is. He'll be wanting to know more about you," Martha said, her tone gentle but serious. "Men like him value honesty." Lydia's smile faded. "There are things, my past." "Child, we all have pasts. What matters is whether you're ashamed of who you are now." Martha set aside her book. "Whatever brought you here, you've proven yourself a good person in my house. That's what counts." Lydia twisted her locket between her fingers, a habit when she was anxious. "My mother died last year," she said finally. "There was scandal, people talked." Martha waited, not pressing for details. "She was ill for a long time. The doctors, the medicine, it cost everything we had. My father had already passed, and I was working as a teacher, but it wasn't enough." Lydia's voice cracked. She went to work in a place no respectable woman would to pay for her own medicine. When she died of fever, everyone knew where she'd contracted it. Died in shame, they said. Tears streamed down her face now. "I lost my position at the school. No one would hire me. The whispers followed me everywhere, so I took what little I had left and came west." Martha reached across the table to take Lydia's hand. "Your mother sounds like a brave woman who did what she thought necessary for her family. There's no shame in that, only in how others treated you both." "Do you think I should tell Garrett?" Lydia asked, fear evident in her voice. "That's for you to decide," Martha replied. "But remember, this is Redemption Springs. Most folks here have stories they don't tell." The days that followed were filled with both anticipation and anxiety for Lydia. Garrett called on Sunday as promised, taking her for a drive along the creek. The following week, he escorted her to a church social, and the week after that, they attended a town meeting together. With each meeting, they grew closer. Garrett told her more about his life, his childhood in Missouri, his time in the war that he rarely discussed with others, his dreams of someday having his own small ranch. Lydia shared stories of teaching in Pittsburgh, her love of books, and her hope to perhaps start a proper school in Redemption Springs someday. But she couldn't bring herself to tell him about her mother, fearing the light in his eyes would dim if he knew the truth. October turned to November, bringing cooler weather and the first hints of winter. One crisp afternoon, Garrett arrived at the boarding house with an invitation. "Mr. McAllister is sending me to Phoenix to arrange for winter supplies," he explained as they walked through town. "I'll be gone at least 2 weeks." Lydia tried to hide her disappointment. "That's a long journey." "It is," he agreed, then added hesitantly, "I was hoping. That is, I wanted to ask if I might write to you while I'm away." "I'd like that very much," she replied, her heart lifting. They stopped at the edge of town, where the desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of rust and gold by the setting sun. "Lydia," Garrett said softly, using her given name for the first time, "these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." He took her hands in his expression earnest. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. I care for you deeply." Lydia's joy at his words was tempered by the secret she still carried. "Garrett, there's something I should tell you. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share," he interrupted gently. "I've seen your goodness, your strength. Whatever brought you here doesn't change who you are now." Tears welled in Lydia's eyes. "You can't know that." "I do know it," he insisted, "but if it eases your heart to tell me, I'm listening." The moment had come. Lydia took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling at first, then growing steadier as she recounted her mother's illness, their desperate situation, and the choices that had led to her flight west. "My mother died in shame," she concluded, tears flowing freely now. "That's what they all said. I couldn't stay where everyone knew, where they looked at me and saw only scandal." Garrett listened without interruption, his hands holding hers firmly throughout her story. When she finished, he reached up to gently wipe the tears from her cheeks. "Your mother made a sacrifice for her family," he said quietly. "There's no shame in that, only love and courage." His eyes held hers intently. "And you, coming all this way alone, starting over with nothing, that's the same courage, Lydia." A sob escaped her. "You don't think less of me." "Think less of you?" Disbelief colored his voice. "Lydia Reeves, I think the world of you, more with each passing day." He drew her closer, his arms encircling her protectively. "Out here, we judge people by their actions, not their pasts or their families. You've earned respect in redemption springs through your own merit." Lydia leaned into his embrace, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Garrett tilted her chin up gently. "I have to leave tomorrow, but when I return—" He hesitated, then continued with determination. "When I return, I'd like to speak with you about our future, if you'll allow it." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Lydia knew with certainty that her journey west had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "I'll be waiting," she promised. The 2 weeks of Garrett's absence stretched endlessly for Lydia. True to his word, he sent letters, 3 of them, carried by riders traveling between Phoenix and Redemption Springs. His words were sometimes awkward but always sincere, describing the bustling territorial capital and confessing how often his thoughts turned to her. Lydia read each letter until she had memorized every word and wrote back with equal honesty, sharing her daily life at the boarding house and her growing feelings for him. Winter arrived in earnest while Garrett was away, bringing cold winds and occasional frost that transformed the desert landscape. The evening he was due to return, Lydia watched anxiously from the boarding house window as snow began to fall, unusual for the area and potentially dangerous for travelers. "He'll be fine," Martha reassured her, bringing a cup of hot tea. "Garrett Jones knows this country better than most." "What if something's happened to him?" Lydia couldn't help but worry. "The roads, that man would crawl through fire to get back to you," Martha said firmly. "Now stop fretting and help me with supper. The boarders will be hungry and keeping busy will do you good." Lydia tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept wandering to Garrett on the dangerous winter roads. It was nearly 9 o'clock, well after dark, when the knock came at the door. Martha gave Lydia a knowing smile. "Best see who that is." Lydia rushed to the door and flung it open to find Garrett standing there, snow dusting his hat and shoulders, his face red from the cold but his eyes warm as they met hers. "You're back," she breathed, relief washing over her. Told you I would be, he replied with a tired smile. May I come in? It's rather cold out here. Martha appeared behind Lydia. For heaven's sake, girl, let the man inside before he freezes to death. Garrett Jones, you look half-starved. Sit by the fire while I fix you a plate. As Martha bustled off to the kitchen, Garrett removed his snow-covered coat and hat. There was an unusual nervousness about him as he followed Lydia into the parlor where a fire blazed welcomingly. How was your journey? She asked as they sat before the fire. Long, he admitted, but successful. We got everything McAllister needed and then some. He reached into his pocket. I brought you something from Phoenix. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Lydia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver hair comb inlaid with turquoise. Garrett, she gasped. It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you, he said softly, then cleared his throat. Lydia, these past 2 weeks being away from you, it made everything clear to me. He took her hands in his expression solemn yet tender. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, life doesn't wait. When you find something precious, you hold on to it with both hands. Lydia's heart thundered in her chest as Garrett continued. I love you, Lydia Reeves. I love your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I love how you've built a new life here without bitterness, despite everything you've been through. He took a deep breath. I can't offer you riches or an easy life. What I can promise is honor, respect, and love for as long as I live. He slid from the chair to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Will you marry me, Lydia? Tears of joy sprang to her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Garrett, I will. He rose and pulled her gently to her feet, gathering her into his arms. Their lips met in a first kiss that was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. Martha found them thus when she returned with Garrett's supper. She cleared her throat loudly, but her eyes twinkled with approval. I take it congratulations are in order, she said, setting down the tray. Garrett turned to her respectfully, his arm still around Lydia's waist. Mrs. Peterson, I've asked Lydia to be my wife, and she's done me the great honor of accepting. About time, Martha declared. Now eat your supper before it gets cold. Can't have you wasting away before the wedding. They were married on Christmas Day in the small church of Redemption Springs, with Martha Peterson and Edward McAllister standing as witnesses. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, held in the dining room of the boarding house. Sheriff Sam proposed the first toast. To Garrett and Lydia Jones, may your life together be as bright as the star that guided you both to Redemption Springs. As winter gave way to spring, Garrett and Lydia settled into a small house on the edge of town. With McAllister's blessing and financial backing, Garrett began developing his own herd of cattle on land adjacent to the Crescent Moon Ranch. Lydia, with Martha's encouragement, opened a small school in a vacant storeroom, teaching the children of Redemption Springs to read and write. On their first anniversary, Garrett presented Lydia with a deed to their house and land, finally paid in full. It's not much compared to what some have, he said, but it's ours, free and clear. Lydia, her hand resting on her growing belly where their first child was due in spring, smiled radiantly. It's everything I ever dreamed of. That night, as they sat together on their porch watching the desert sunset, Lydia opened her mother's locket. Inside, she had placed a tiny portrait of Garrett opposite her mother's image. I wish she could have known you, Lydia said softly. She would have loved you. Garrett placed his hand over hers. She lives on in you in your courage, your determination. Our children will know her through you. Lydia leaned against her husband's steady shoulder, gazing out at the land that had given her a second chance. Once, she had fled west in shame and despair. Now, she looked toward the future with hope and pride, secure in the honor and love Garrett had promised and delivered. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Lydia thought of her mother's final words to her. Find a place where you can begin again. In Redemption Springs with Garrett, she had found not just a new beginning but a home.